Thank you for putting that together, and thank you, most importantly, for those of you who were featured, or your family members of those who were featured in that. Very moving, isn't it, Craig? Very moving. And we want you to know that you will always be loved and appreciated and respected here at Stones Hill Community Church. We love you and the service that you provided for all of us. I'm Pastor Joey, and it's my privilege to welcome you here this morning. It always is. We are currently in a series called The Spiritual Dark Ages, A Hero Must Rise. And boy, I tell you, I think God knew what he was doing when he had us set up this series and prepare us for the days ahead. Some of you remember that last week I talked to you about an older brother who would let his beard grow for a couple of days, and then he would catch me and give me what he would call a whisker burn, just for the fun of it. Okay, guess what? That older brother is here this morning. In fact, all three of my brothers are here this morning, and it would be a privilege of mine if you would just stand and let everybody welcome you here this morning. Yes, go ahead. I'm going to embarrass you. Yes. Jeff, Randy, and Rob, and such a very important part of my life. And I just want to say thank you for coming. It's been great to have you here. Always is. I'm sorry for getting emotional about that. But it really is a joy. I'm not crying because they're here, because I'm sad. It really is a joy. And it just seems like so many of you have, in my church family, been showed up at just the right time in my life. And it just seems like this weekend was a great weekend for them to come. So I'm so glad the Lord worked that out. Thank you. Thank you. Love you too. Yes, I do. And it's out of that great love that, as many of you have loved and served the country, it's out of love and a desire to serve our Savior that I'm here. And this morning, the book of Judges is asking us to do a lot of research. The book of Judges is asking me to take on a lot of hard-hitting issues. And so it's very difficult to skip those issues when the Bible itself raises them. And that's what we're doing here as we teach through the book of Judges. We'll do book preaching here, and if you are new, just stay with the series, because we'll break the scriptures down verse by verse, chapter by chapter, as we work through these passages. This morning, what we're going to do is, as we go through the book, occasionally we need to stop and step back and take on a special topic, and then we'll zoom back in and we'll continue to work our way through. And this day, this weekend, we're stepping back a little and we're looking at a topic that's very, very critical, I think, to us in our times. Know this morning that there are two kingdoms. There's a kingdom of God, and I think we all recognize this, and there is the kingdom of man. You are a kingdom or citizen of heaven, especially if you've activated the life and work of Christ in your life. You have a citizenship in another land, and as was already mentioned this morning, you are an ambassador of that kingdom. And so you are a citizen of heaven, the city of God. But at the same time, you are a citizen of earth, where you currently live, you own property, you work a job, you serve, you raise your family, and you build a life. We can't deny those two kingdoms. And what is to be our approach to this dual kingdom? I know one author has authored a book called Kingdoms in Conflict. And so many times those kingdoms can be in conflict. The values of a heavenly kingdom and the values of the kingdom that Jesus came to live for, to present to us, to teach us, even to die for, those values can conflict with the values of an earthly kingdom. And so we understand this. But at the same time, it is important for us to strive not only to be good citizens of heaven, but to be good citizens of earth. And to do our very best to make our nation, our community, our family, the very best it can possibly be, and to have a sense of accomplishment and joy and pride. No, not egocentrism. It is not about, patriotism is not about being bigoted. It is not about establishing some quote-unquote imperial cultic group. I love my wife. I'm not making a cult over her. I love my country. I'm not making a cult over it. But I love it. I'm patriotic because I see what God can do in a nation that honors Him. And so patriotism is still okay. Now listen, having said this, God doesn't overwhelm us with His kingdom presently, but there comes a time when He Himself will implement His kingdom. It will break into the kingdoms of man, and He will set up an earthly kingdom and be glorified in human history. And I believe that. And the prophets and those who study the prophets and eschatology, those who study the last days, and you've been through Revelation with me, and there's lots of things we could say about this, but there is the promise that the kingdom of heaven will merge into and collapse the rebellious kingdoms of men. And those nations will not be obliterated. They will be given choice. Will you serve or will you deny? And so it's important, I think, for all nations to make personal choices and to endeavor to be a nation under God now. So when the time comes, we'll be ready to honor King Jesus when He sets up His kingdom. Now, but we have a dual responsibility. Don't miss that this morning, because we live out the values of Jesus, but we also support the role of God-ordained government in preserving order as a witness to God's authority over the present kingdoms of this world. Let me make it clear this morning that when they're back in the Old Testament in the book of Genesis, we read about a fall. And I sometimes will talk about the fall. And the fall was when we rose up in rebellion against God. And after we fell, back in Genesis 3, and you can read it there, it started a tidal wave of rebellion. And this tidal wave of rebellion would sabotage all of creation if it wasn't for God's common grace, setting up government, law, order, the family, another institution in addition to the government. Not only government and family, but the church. And that's another institution of God. And so without these institutions of God in place, the results of the fall would be a great tidal wave that would just sabotage all of creation. And so we're going to look at this and explore this a little bit here this morning, because I think all of us want to see God's common grace play out in such a way that we can all enjoy our lives and honor God with our lives. So government, once again, don't misread or misunderstand what I'm saying. Government is not perfect. It's flawed. There's leaders that maybe have values that are contradictory to God's values, the principles of the kingdom values, the principles of Jesus' values, okay? We understand this. But yet Paul calls government and civil servants, whether it's police officers or military. In fact, do we have police officers here this morning? We want to honor you too. Police officers, just put your hand up. Yes? Some of you? Yes? 1, 2, 3? Yes. Let's give them a hand. Yes. Yes. Hey, you're servants of God. You're called by God to help hold back this flood tide of evil that would overwhelm our community without you. And so we're thankful for your lives. We're thankful for your contribution. And so again, government isn't perfect. No one is perfect. We all are flawed in our families, in our churches, in our government systems. We're flawed. It breaks down sometimes. But when there is this steady effort to honor God, and we understand what God teaches us in the Bible, that government, though not perfect, it is a remedy for sin and rebellion. It's not a remedy of sin and rebellion. Only Christ can do that. But government, in its God-ordained role, is a means to restrain evil so that you can be safe in a very evil world. And government is in place by God. Again, Romans 13 teaches us this. Other places, Peter teaches us this. That government is in place by God to stymie the tidal wave of evil. Now, that's good news. And that's wonderful news. And also the hope is that these systems will work until the kingdom of heaven vanquishes the kingdoms of men. You know, this summer I had an epiphany. I was watching the opening ceremonies of the Olympics in London. And as I watched all of the representatives and all of the nations and their athletes parading around the Colosseum in London with their flags held high, I was moved by this parade of nations. And I thought about the Old Testament prophets who predicted that there would come a day when all of the nations would send representatives, not to London, but to Jerusalem, where every tribe, every nation, again, nations are not obliterated in God's plan and economy. They still have their identities. But in every nation, every ethnic group, every tribe would show up and would offer allegiance to the true warrior king, the Savior of the world. And it was wonderful because I looked at Donnell and I said, that's how it's going to be. And I thought of, and why would I think that? Well, because Zechariah 14, 16 through 17, and just listen to the words this morning. Then the survivors from all the nations that have attacked Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship. Year after year to worship the King, the Lord Almighty, and to celebrate the festival of tabernacles. Verse 17 in Zechariah 14 says, and if any of the peoples of the earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the true King, the Lord Almighty, they will have no rain. Wow, there's judgment if there's not submission. Now listen, nations are not obliterated in His coming reign. Rather, they surrender to the authority of our King, romantic warrior, King Christ, who we will bow the knee and honor Him. He will be glorified in human history. And when I saw those national representatives in the parade of nations in this summer in London, the truth of the prophets, and especially of Zechariah 14, came booming into my mind and my heart. And when I saw those representatives and the truth of the prophets came to me, I was thinking this is how it's going to be year after year. And Zechariah is calling it centuries before. And after I saw the parade of nations, I had a new motivation. I got patriotic. Why? I root my patriotism in eschatology. That's why patriotism is still okay. Even though others would denigrate the idea. Patriotism is still okay, and I got patriotic because I want to see my flag at that millennial parade. I want to see United States of America represented there. And I think it's our job as families and churches and members of a community to ensure that we do our very best to be a nation under God. Because someday we'll be given the opportunity to honor our true King. Now, some of you know by now I'm very patriotic. Very patriotic. And this is one of the reasons why. I'm patriotic for other reasons, but this is one of the reasons why. It's a very very personal, close thing for me, especially in light of the guys we've got serving on the front lines out there, police officers, soldiers, others who are public servants, even those who wear suit and ties, public servants of the common good. Man, I appreciate what they do. Now, I'm not so sure, and maybe you just go to slide 26 for me. Thank you for the video. Slide 26 for me. I'm not so sure, even though I'm very patriotic, I'm not so sure that I'm ready to paint my house red, white, and blue yet. Okay? I'm not ready to take this step. I don't know what the deal was. I think some community home group had forbade this guy to put his flag out on his front yard, so he fixed the problem. Okay? He fixed the problem. I'm patriotic. That's the way it's going to be. You see, the seeds of patriotism, friends, again, rooted in eschatology, rooted in biblical theology, rooted in the common grace of God, who's raised up institutions to help circumvent and hold back the flood tide of evil that would overwhelm the planet without His grace in these means and methods. And this idea of patriotism, though, goes all the way back personally for me. I remember in the first grade, in the mid-1970s, Mrs. Dolores Cook taught all of us the great patriotic songs, and what a privilege it was to live in a land of the brave and the free. And you know, Mrs. Cook also had me laying my head on my desk for a long time, but that's another story. Okay, we won't get into that. And boy, I never thought I could pick my head up off my desk in her class. I guess I was a little bit of a challenge, one of the more challenging students in her classroom at that time. But Mrs. Cook, in her impression, has riveted in my mind and my heart. And we decorated that little elementary school in red, white, and blue. And we learned the patriotic songs of allegiance to a free land. No, not circumventing God. Of course not. We understood God's kingdom is above all. Of course we did. But we understood that sometimes God calls people to special roles in the world. And He calls them to hold back this flood tide of evil sometimes, even though we're flawed and even make mistakes. Even military mistakes may and have been made. Yet there is this overwhelming sense that a nation built on the foundations of our founding fathers and a Judeo-Christian ethic, this sense that we were special, and we would put red, white, and blue all over the school, and we were Americans, and we were to bring hope and joy and light. And a city on a hill all over the world. And American patriotism, though, today, it's cut adrift. We have young college kids. I love college kids. But college kids who will now call American memorials, what a dumb idea. It's like, what are you saying? Are you a product of the revisionist texts that are being written today about that makes criminals out of heroes? Be careful what you buy. American patriotism is now cut adrift. The horizon is lost, and we no longer know who we are. And if we don't know who we are, we don't know what to defend. And so we're in this never land, the spiritual dark ages, where a hero must rise and champion the cause of family, champion the cause of God-honoring government, championing the cause of local churches who see this vision. You know, the primary reason I still remain a patriot is the reason I still say the pledge. The reason I still tear up as some musical artist belts out a great rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner when 4 fighter jets fly across the sky. And I got to witness that at a football game at Notre Dame one time. And I tell you what, after I saw that, the game was beside the point. I didn't care who they were playing when I saw those jets streak across the sky and experience the Notre Dame pregame ceremonies where they raise that flag and they understand the price was paid. And man, they stand in tribute to that and they salute that. And the reason I still admire people in the military, the reason that I'm patriotic, yes, it's not only eschatological based and theologically based and rooted in the common grace of God. It is because that I have this deep sense of gratitude to God for allowing me to live in a land where I can live with my brothers and enjoy their company and raise my own family. It's a land that allows me to work. It allows me to love. It allows me to lead a relatively peaceful life. It allows me to enjoy life with my wife. It allows you to enjoy your life, establish your home, and raise your family in peace and tranquility. That's why I'm patriotic. I can't get past the gratitude of those men and women, those officers, and those in public places who ensure that I have that kind of life. I'm deeply grateful. I will forever be grateful for these men and women, these who had a vision and have a vision. I think patriotism is still okay because we still have a government, though flawed, and it still acts as agents of God's common grace. You know, if I could just illustrate it this way, give an example. You know, God may not zap the terrorist immediately or a criminal immediately before they do a crime or detonate a bomb or whatever. And God loves all people. Don't misunderstand me. But what He does do is that He gives us law enforcement and agents of common grace who are described as servants in the Bible to curb and even stop the evil before it ever happens, or if it does happen, to chase it down and hold it accountable. That's the only way the world can work in this fallen world in which we live. You see, it's God working through God-ordained institutions. And this is why I'm still patriotic. Now listen, imagine a life without government. Imagine a life without police officers. Imagine a life without law and order, without the military and firefighters and police and EMTs and people who make policy and procedures. What would life be like? What would America be like without these incredible agents of God? I answer, the book of Judges. Judges is what happens when all this stuff gets in tailspin and we lose identity of who we are and what we're here for. Judges shows us, and if you would, I've got a slide in the show that shows a spiral, a downward spiral. I'm going to challenge my clickers back there this morning. Find the other slide. It's actually a picture of a spiral that go. There we go. What happens in Judges? I showed this to you before. Is that it's not just a cycle of rebellion and sin, and then they find themselves in bondage and servitude, and they call out to God, and God intervenes salvifically in their lives and redeems them through the hero, because the hero rises up, and then they digress back into a disobedience again, and they repeat the cycle. It's not just this in Judges, it's this. And so by the time you start the book of Judges, and you see introductory things, you see battles and military and whatnot throughout the book. But what you see is that even the lives of the judges are getting less and less what they should be as heroes. And by the time you get to the end of Judges, you see a very horrific ending of an age, a spiritual dark age. Okay? Because people have gotten further and further away from the core values of those core kingdom values of Jesus. Okay? And of course, what we want to do is we want to interject into this cycle. We want to stop the cycle. And I'm calling you in this series, again, a high challenge series. I'm calling you to step up and be heroic in your respective vocations. We'll deal with a lot of vocations in the series, but especially this morning we've dealt with this idea of a military or a police officer, a public servant. You can be heroic, and you can see your calling as being a servant of God to hold back this flood tide of evil. We affirm that. And what we see in Judges on slide number 6, if you would, go to slide number 6, verse 16. There's a lot of verses really to look at this morning. I'm going to reduce it just to this one because I think it helps underscore my point. We'll look at just the very first verse of Judges 2. Then the Lord raised up judges, these freedom fighters, these public servants, who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Okay? They were called by God, raised up by God. And these are not guys that are looking to be violent. These are not guys that are looking to be bloodthirsty. No, they were people who observed the bondage. They were people who observed the rights were being taken away from the people there in Israel as they were establishing themselves as tribes, tribal states, and nations. They were observing the confiscation of property. They were observing the lives of their families being threatened. At the same time, they were discouraged. They were fearful. They were intermarrying. They were accommodating the philosophy and the worldview of the Canaanites. And as a result, they were being bullied and picked on and taken advantage of. And if you've ever been in that kind of situation, you know how horrible that can feel and that can be. And that's the people of Israel in the times of the judges. They themselves were disobedient, but they were subservient to these other worldviews. And you see, the raiders were bent on destruction. They were going to be violent. They were going to steal and rape and maim and destroy. And I've actually talked to you about Canaanite culture and the moral problem, the so-called moral problem of the conquest. We've dealt with that and argued that God is in fact justified in how He handles Himself here in the book of Judges. But it was a Canaanite culture driven by revenge. They would have had their way in the nation of Israel. Couldn't have done anything about it. Were it not for these heroes that God raised up to stymie this flood tide of evil that was trying to overtake the land. And there is a time when evil will not stop unless it is confronted. And as a very last resort, and our police officers know, unless you physically confront stuff, people are going to get hurt. And our military guys can tell you that unless you confront these rogue, even at times as a very last resort. I'll talk to you about just war theory in the coming days. Okay? We'll postpone just war theory for another message. All right? But what I want you to understand, if it's not for public servants who take a stand, their lives will be sabotaged. And that's what these guys realize here in Judges. And God raises them up. And Paul recognizes their role, even in Romans. If you would, go to slide number 4 for me. We'll just briefly read Romans 13, 1 through 5. Just follow along with me. The civil authorities must at times use force as God's representatives for the preservation of good and the restoration of the peace. Otherwise, everybody's sabotaged. Look at this, Romans 13. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. Of course, we understand there's times for revolt. There's times when governing authorities are corrupt. And there's times for revolution. But Paul's not writing about revolution right now. He's writing about a God-ordained authority and our general idea and disposition toward that. And he says, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Listen, for rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one in authority, Paul says? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. Now, I realize some in authority are just corrupt. But as a general rule, they serve a good purpose in the world. And we should honor that purpose. But if you do wrong, Paul says, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. And that's one of the most powerful statements that Paul makes in support of those who serve in civil servant roles, like officers and military personnel and public servants. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, he says, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of a possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. And then on slide 5, again, we'll just read quickly, slide 5. 1 Peter says, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. So the state or government is ordained by God to curb evil, and at the very most extreme times will have to do that. Hopefully it will be an exception, not the rule. We'll have to do that by bearing the sword, Paul says. The church is not charged with this duty. Don't misunderstand, okay? Do not bring your weapons to church next week, all right? Please do not do that. I'm not asking you to arm yourselves and go fight the battle, okay? What I'm saying is that God has a way that that's supposed to work, and government is the way that that happens. And that's why I would hold that the Christians may as a church, we're not going to arm ourselves and go to battle. But if we've got people in our congregations who are Christians, especially, and they serve in these public servant roles, we're going to support them in that role, because biblically, I see them as God's servants. They're called by God. I'm called to pastor a congregation. They're called to hold back the flood tide of evil, lest all of us be overwhelmed by it. And I, for one, am grateful. Now listen, when it comes to military intervention, we're not advocating, and I don't think the Bible advocates military intervention as the rule. I think it's the very last resort, and I'll give you I'll go over the set of just war principles in the upcoming days to help explain that. But again, if we don't respond, if these servants aren't in place and we don't respond in certain times and situations, the rebel raider will rise up, will create a chaotic society for all of us, and where all of our homes, all of our lives, all of our posterity will be in jeopardy. And so this series is about God raising up heroes to lead us. It's about God raising up these heroes that sometimes wear uniforms, and sometimes they wear camo fatigues, and sometimes they wear they have a sidearm, sometimes they have shirt and ties, but nevertheless they're God's servants to curb the rising tide of evil in the world. Listen, this morning, Judges shows us how bad it gets when there's no one in civil authority to maintain order. Look at slide 11 with me. As we look ahead in the book of Judges, slide 11, in the times of the Judges, because they didn't have these organized people we call police officers, because they didn't have these organized people we call military, because they didn't have a well-established government. They had little, if any, government in these tribal states, had some measure of government, but very little. And because they had this, we see that in the times of the Judges, people were afraid to go out in public, and they traveled the byways rather than the highways of the land. Judges 5:6, in the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Yael, the highways were abandoned. Travelers took to the winding paths. They couldn't travel as we travel in 33 or 6 or whatever. Those kind of roads were too full of dangerous obstacles, dangerous people. Because there's no one as a common servant, a civil servant, to rise up against the evil that prevailed. And I'm not sure where we're headed in America, you know. I'm not sure where things are going to go. You know, I honestly, again, don't misunderstand. I saw a statistic this week. Whatever this represents, you can make the call. Did you know that gun sales are astronomically going out the roof? Did you know that? There are thousands of guns being purchased today. Why is that? I'm not advocating what you do, but why is it? There's a perception. Things are getting unstable. Things are getting scary at times. Certain places and certain communities and societies, everything's up for grabs. Male and female's got to be defined. Marriage has got to be redefined. Life purpose has to be redefined. Why we're here as a nation, it's all up for grabs. It's being redefined, and people see it and sense the uncertainty of it. They're wanting to feel safe because they don't know where it's going to go. It's the time of the Judges. It's just like we see in this book. They abandoned the common highways in light of the winding paths because it was safer, and they would slink through from one place to the next and hopefully avoid the enemy. That's the way it was in Judges. Hey, look at this. And slide number 12. In the times of the Judges, people committed violent crimes with little fear of punishment. Hey, look at what it says in Judges 19:22. Now notice we've come through this whole era of decay. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Hey, listen, who you going to call? Not Ghostbusters, okay? But listen, who you going to call? when the wicked people surround the house? I know some of you are ready to go. Okay? You're ready. I know. I've talked to some of you. All right? But who are you going to call? You're going to call that police officer and say, I'm surrounded by wicked people. Can you come and give me a hand? And they'll come. I know the police officers in our church, they'll come ready at your aid as a servant of God in that situation. And what we see here is that there was no fear. They're pounding on the door. They shouted to the old man who owned the house, bring out the man who came to your... I'm sorry I have to be so crude, but bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him. We're going to rape the guy. And we don't care who knows. You see what I'm saying? When you don't have these agents of common grace, society goes to pieces. Imagine life without somebody to call in this situation. When you see this, it makes you appreciate civil government and God's gift of it. And these guys I'm talking about this morning, they are God's servants to preserve the peace and protect and ensure the safe society, that all of us are safe. And then look at slide 13, okay? Slide 13, in the times of the judges, immorality was dominant. It was dominant in the land. Even the judges were caught up in the quagmire. And Samson, one of the judges, he saw a prostitute and he went in to spend the night with her. Well, that's nothing new. That's been going on a long time. He was a he-man with a she-weakness. Yes, he was. And we're going to preach about that. We got a lot of she-weakness, okay? And she's are wonderful. Man, they are great. Thank God for she's. But what happens is when a society, and you'll see this in Judges, the women in Judges are very disrespected as the book wears on. And that's what happens. Men won't lead. Women are denigrated and they're not respected as they should. And you see all this played out in a society where everybody did what was right in their own eyes. Listen, guys, I know what I'm talking about here this morning. It's the spiritual dark ages. And that's where we're headed unless we've got some men of God and women of God who will rise up and say, no, we're going to lead and stand on principle. We're going to start by being heroic, by inviting Christ into our life. We're going to center our life and our lifestyle on His principles, and we're going to live that out from here in the nations in which we live. Listen, that's the way we got to do this. You know, I thought of a quotation by Martin Niemöller. He was a guy that was for Hitler in the early days of the Reich, and as it wore on, he saw the sadistic man that he had become. He was, and that he was even more so becoming. This is what Niemöller said. He said, in Germany, they came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. And then they came for me. And by that time, no one was left to speak up. Again, I say it, all that's necessary for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. Nothing in terms of rising up against the tide of evil and taking a stand on some very critical issues of our time. Hey, listen, this morning I want to draw this to some applications quickly. First of all, if you are a public servant, you are maybe a soldier, an officer, a politician, I want you to do an excellent job because God has raised you up to be heroic in our community and in our nation, our world. So I want you to do your best to do what you do with excellence. I love what I read when Jesus talks about, soldiers and centurions, and the Gospels mention it, and Jesus references it, and John the Baptist talks about it. What is so astounding to me is that he never commanded anybody to leave the military. Jesus or John the Baptist. In fact, they hold the Roman centurion role in a role of honor, providing the person is honorable in the execution of that role. And so John the Baptist, he says to soldiers, he says, don't do unnecessary violence and be content with your wages, he says in Luke 3:14. And so he's not saying throw down your swords and abandon your vocation. No, he says honor God within the role you're in. And you're a Christian, you're a Christ follower, you're the best officer, best military guy we could possibly have because you honor God and His values. Okay? And so the New Testament has some other things to say about that, but most importantly is that what you do with excellence and distinction, and do it well. And don't get caught up in all the petty tiffs that community members can get caught up in. Be a professional at what you do. And then secondly, if you see a public servant, thank them for what they do and show them respect based on what I have presented to you this morning. View them as a servant of God. I think sometimes we tend to disrespect people in authority. This summer, some of you know that I do. I like to ride that little scooter I got around, right? Okay, you know this. This summer, I went to Columbia City on a little impromptu trip down. And you know how sometimes you'll be riding and you'll get a craving for something like a funnel cake? All right? Okay, maybe not you, but that's me. Funnel cake with lots of powder, okay? Powdered sugar, that's what I was craving, okay? I happened to see the streets blocked off in Columbia City, all right? I'm on my scooter. I'm wanting funnel cake, okay? The streets are blocked off. There's a little carnival. I see stands. It reminds me of funnel cake territory. So I'm thinking, I'm going to go get a funnel cake. I see the barriers. I see all these little middle schoolers and high schoolers, and they're running around. It's like if I park my scooter and go get me a funnel cake, I'm going to come back and I'm not going to have a way home. I just kind of thought maybe that's what was going to happen. So I thought, I looked this way. I looked that way. I didn't see anybody in authority. So here I go, right in down the middle of the street. Okay? Vendors are looking at me like, what is he doing? Does he know that's not allowed? And everybody's kind of looking at me like, and then I see the guy coming. The badge, the sidearm, about 6'3" or 4. Okay? He's coming down the street. And I'm thinking, what do I do? So I had a revelation. All right? I'll just park it real quick, kick the kickstand up and just walk like I belong here. And he saw me park it. He comes up, hey, man, you can't have that in here. Oh, really? Yeah. Well, I listen, I got a craving for funnel cake. And I got a craving for funnel cake. And I just was wanting to park just briefly and get my funnel cake. He said, listen, you can't leave it here. Ride down that way. You'll probably see a funnel cake stand. You can go ahead and get your funnel cake and get out of town. Okay? So I said, okay, I'll do that. I drove by. All the stands, the merry-go-rounds and the rides and the step right ups and the bingo and all this stuff I'm driving by, I didn't see the funnel cake stand. So I turn around. Is he still there? No, he's not. So I head back down the street. It was crazy. I don't know why I made this decision, but I decided I'd just make an executive decision. I'll just drive back down real quick because I didn't see the funnel cake. He sees me do that. Here he comes. So we had a little confrontation. He says, did I not tell you to stay out? And he was getting a little perturbed at me by this time. And I could see he was going to escalate this. I just knew it. And I'm thinking, please don't let any Stones Hill Community Church people have a craving for funnel cake. Because if they do, I'm going to go down by Sunday. I will not be able to preach to those people. And so fortunately others were looking, but nobody from Stones Hill Community Church came by to see what I was doing there. He said, license and registration, please. And so I pulled out my license, and I didn't have a registration because I don't need one for that scooter. And I told him that, but I could see that wasn't going to be good. And so he said, we got a moped here, and I got a Joey Nelson license number. They ran all that on me. Okay. And I'm thinking, oh, this is not good. Why did I get into this mess over funnel cake? I could have just gone to Kroger's and got me some Nutter Butters, and I'd have been good. But why in the world did I choose funnel cake in this way? And so all that checks out. The guy wouldn't let me get funnel cake after that. He escorts me over. He says, if I ever see you here again, I'm going to tow that thing. And I thought for a second, and then the humor of that hit me, towing my scooter. I could just see my scooter. being towed. Of course, I didn't crack a smile because I was like, no, I'm not going to push this guy. But I was all the while, I'm thinking, he is God's public servant. All right? I'm going to respect him. I'm going to respect what he's doing because someday somebody's going to jack that scooter and I'm going to have to call somebody. And he'll be the guy I call because I need help. I don't have a way home, right? I'm going to respect that guy. You know what? I don't know what your experiences have been with authority and police officers and firefighters and military personnel. I don't know what your family background is, but these guys are on the front lines of it. They deserve so much of your respect. They deserve so much of your honor. You know what? Understood. Like every vocation, some of these guys misrepresent that role. And they don't do a very good job. But I guarantee you the guys we got here in this church this morning who are officers, they do an excellent job. I want you to give them a hand one more time. And then, ice chip, excuse me. Number 3 here, if you are a public servant, do an excellent job. God has raised you up. Number 2, if you see a public servant, thank them for what they do and show them respect. They deserve that. And then 3, if you know the public servant, maybe a soldier, like we know here and we've had on the screen this morning, let them feel your love often, for they serve in a high-risk vocation. And you may not get to see them next Sunday because of the risk of the vocation they're in. And so you let them know how much you love them, how much you honor them. And maybe God's calling some of you to be officers and military soldiers and politicians. Man, we need some good politicians, okay? We need them bad. And maybe God is calling you. And we want this church to be a place where we can incubate that vision. If you want to be a pilot, in fact, I'm going to give you an opportunity. When I pray here today, just say, God, I'm open. I feel like maybe you want me to go into one of these vocations Pastor Joey's talking about this morning. If that's where you're at, we'll give you the biblical worldview. We'll show you how to think biblically through issues, but we want you to live that out in your respective vocation and your job. We want you to honor Christ with that. Now listen, on this third point here of loving people, okay, because you may not see them tomorrow or next week, you just don't know. I'm reminded of something that happened this summer. Some of you know that this past June we sent one of our sons off to Fort Benning, Georgia for Army boot camp. And that went great for him. And I got to see the graduation. Slide 27 kind of starts this series of pictures that I wanted to show you. And one of Will's friends, Joey Jacobs, said, Joey, text Joey. It's kind of cool. But he said, and his dad is named Joey. So I got to make sure I know what Joey I'm looking at. Okay? But he said, I know Will's going to get checked in at Fort Wayne. I know he's going to be catching a flight to Georgia. He said, we're going to go sit around the corner. And when you come out of the house to get in your van to take him to check in down in Fort Wayne and put him on a flight to boot camp, he said, you text me real quick. And we're going to come driving around the corner just as you're walking out of the house. Well, I get Will out of the house. And I say, Will, why don't you stop and pose for a picture? And, of course, he's not happy about that. He never is. Okay? So I hold him up a little. It's like, come on, Joey. Oh, right there. Let me get a couple more. I kind of hear Joey coming. I hear him before I see him. But Will doesn't know what's going on. Joey, of his own accord, and his friends show up, and as Will is getting in the van to go to military Army boot camp, these guys show up playing the Oak Ridge Boys at the top of their speaker volume, and they're had the flags hanging out the window to give him a send-off. And they didn't just show up there. They got out. We took pictures of these guys, and you go to the next slide if you would. We took pictures, and there's Joey hugging Will, and some of the other guys there parked with their flags out the window. I tell you what, there's some people who understand patriotism still.
There's some people that still got it. Some of that class of 2012, they understand what it means to be an American, a God-honoring American. I appreciate these guys. Next slide. Okay, there's all those guys, patriots through and through. Next slide. Okay. Yes, there at graduation, we made it. We made it. And not only did they take pictures, but we went around the circle and we went down 33. And music, I guess, was still playing. The flags were flying. Gave us a kind of an escort, a parade all the way down 33 to about 200. And you know where that's at if you're local. And then they cut off. And I looked over and I thought I saw a little tear beat up in the old soldier's eye. They loved him. And they cared for him. And they understood what risk lay ahead. Listen, you love your people that serve in these civil vocations, because you never know when a day might be their last day. You make sure you love and you care for them. I got to hasten on here this morning. There's so much more I want to tell you and share with you, but I guess I'll close with this. One of my favorite public servants is Abraham Lincoln. Who would have thunk it, right? He appointed generals. He led a divided nation. He made hard decisions. He offered words of hope. This guy was incredible. Talk about a hero that God raised up for a spiritually dark time. Man, this was the guy. And in the Civil War on July 1st, 1863, of course, you know the Confederates were supreme for the first 2 days at Gettysburg. And on the third day, General Lee issued orders for an assault on the Union lines. And at 1 p.m., the assault began over an open field. And some of you have seen that movie. Lee's army was cut down like wheat by heavy mortar fire. And the slaughter was so great that it was decided to dedicate a national cemetery for the men who had died there. And after the battle, the bodies had been hastily buried, and they wanted to reinter them because give them appropriate burial there at Gettysburg. And Gettysburg Address happened here. Lincoln went to Gettysburg by train. He had written half of his Gettysburg Address in Washington, and he added a few more lines in Gettysburg. And on the morning of the day in which the ceremony was going to be held, he added those lines to finish out this short 267-word speech that's become an immortal prose poem, patriotic through and through, yet honoring God all the way. And shortly before 11 o'clock in the morning, Lincoln left the town on horseback to go to the new cemetery on its outskirts of Gettysburg. And an official procession accompanied him across the battlefield, which still showed marks of the battle that had happened there 4 months before. One biographer of Lincoln says that the dead horses were still lying on the field, and the sick, sweet odor of decay tainted the crisp November air. Still, the wounds very raw, very rough. Edward Everett spoke for a couple of hours, and then the Baltimore Glee Club shared a song, and then Lincoln got up and he said, 77 years ago. He went on to say that the world would little note or long remember what he said, but boy was he wrong. He talked about the proposition that all men are created equal, and he understood, the United States of America understood that. And even though they tried to make the black person a non-person, I kid you not, the legal minds of the Civil War era defined how they were not human and could be treated as property, kind of like we do today. People are not human and can be eliminated. I kid you not. This is the issue. These were some of the issues. And Lincoln stood up and said, we're created equal in the image of God. Regardless of the color of our skin or the flag we fly under, we're made in the image of God, for crying out loud. And he went on in that speech and he says, for fallen soldiers, he says, it is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work that they have thus far so nobly carried on. These guys were public servants, and they died for the rights of another human being to live, to exist in freedom. And it is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task, Lincoln says, remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, but this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. You see, it takes heroes to rise up to give us all a new birth of freedom. I don't care what has happened politically in the last week or even year. I don't care what has happened. If you and I, who understand that God's kingdom principles at heart, will rise up and lead, there's hope. There's hope for a better day. During this time in Lincoln's life, people noticed that Lincoln carried a Bible more frequently than he had before. He carried it before, but not as often. And then Dr. Phineas Gurley, who was Lincoln's pastor at the church, affirmed that the death of Willie Lincoln in 1862, Lincoln had a very devastating loss of a couple of sons. Willie was one of those. He said at the death of Willie in 1862 and the visit to the Gettysburg battlefield in 1863, Abraham Lincoln's pastor said of a God-fearing Lincoln, he said, Lincoln personally placed his faith in Christ. He could not do it alone. The liberator himself was liberated. How about you this morning? Do you need liberation from sin's grasp? Is life careening out of control? Is there a civil war? No, not just in a world, but in your heart, your soul. Is there a conflicting of value systems that are working against each other? Is the weight of the world on your shoulders? You might be wearing a uniform or carrying a gun or working for the government, or you serving in some other vocation, helping to curb the evil in the world, but you realize that there is a civil war going on inside, and it's in your own life. And this morning you'd like to give your life to Christ and say, man, I want so much to turn my life over to Him, to have His values show me the way home. And you need someone to step into your life personally and rise up against the tide of evil in your soul, your family, your life, and put a stop to this rising tide. Jesus is the one to do it. Let me quickly hasten to say, I believe that no matter where you are from this morning, no matter what flag you fly under, your ethnicity or nationality, no matter what your past moral choices have been, some of you have come here pretty guilty, feeling pretty guilty about some stuff in your life. I'm here to tell you, no matter what that life has been, Christ came to live and die and rise again for every one of you, all of us. And He came as a saving act of God for all of us. And I hasten to say, it's not following the teachings of Christ. It's Christ Himself that does the saving. That's what the gospel's about. So He Himself does the saving, and then we endeavor to align our lives with His life, and then life restoration can happen. But this morning, if you believe that He has come, salvation is offered in your behalf, then activate His work in your life. Personally receive it. And when you do, you are part of a brand new nation. Peter writes about you're part of a priesthood. You're part of a new nation called the church. And it doesn't have boundaries. It may not have flags. It may not have other traditional things related to it. But it is an army of God, a spiritual army of God that leads through a dark time. And we long and hope for the time when the full kingdom of God can be implemented. But until then, we are committing ourselves to living the freedom values that this Savior came to give us. If you were invited to the Parade of Nations today, the Parade of Nations, showing allegiance to our true King, could you go? If you were invited to put your flag at the top of the pole and say, yes, I fully give my allegiance to Jesus Christ and being the citizen He's called me to be. I want to be a part of that number that can say, you know what? May your kingdom come. May your will be done. May it on earth as it is in heaven. I'm with you all the way. I'm yours. I'm with a whole host of others, family, churches, government, that we're going to put our flag at the top of the pole and we're going to crown you Lord. You know what? Kings and presidents surround themselves with those who rush ahead and have them open the door for these VIPs. But you know what Jesus does? He says, I'll stand at the door and I'll knock and I won't leave. I'll just wait. If you'll turn your life over to me. You don't have to, it's not about, man, I've offended Jesus and times were rough and I'm not going to turn to him now because I didn't turn to him when times were good. You know what? He doesn't care how you come, just that you come. Just that you come and say, hey, I need your help. You'd like to do that this morning? I think you probably would. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that. I'm going to have, before I pray with you, I'm going to have Neil Parks to come. And Neil has written some poetry, he's published some poetry. Why don't you consider looking at some of that, maybe on Amazon or something sometime, and you'll enjoy it. He's going to pronounce a poetic benediction over what we've talked about here today. Neil?
Thank you, Pastor. This selection is called Freedom Reign, Freedom Ring. The things I see, seldom thought, soaring upon revelation. The freedom, bloodshed bought, nation conquers nation. Field spoiled with young blood, a hero and coward side by side, falling breathless in the mud. Sacrifice lives for nation's pride. Duty calling to memory, selfless deeds, rightful honor, left not to fields of glory, etched forever and kept in store. Forget not fallen heroes, nor the cause of freedom, nor its defeated lows, nor the bloodshed ransom. Freedom reigns in the blood, ringing still upon the field, left to rot in the mud by those who to evil yield. Remember still the price paid, that the power of justice and tyranny some victors made was caused by men just like us. The cause of freedom in the end, high banners of the just caught by heaven's wind, cannot be allowed to suffer rust. An evil day it would be to lay down freedom's cause, leaving captive to captivity in the bite of oppressor's jaws. Let the free to the captive bring, even blood shed in the fight. Freedom reign, freedom ring, and the just will see the cause is right.
Let's just affirm that. Yes, thank you. I mentioned last week, we also want to see heroes rise up in a lot of different vocations and fields, poetic field, other soldiering field, also in the world of art. There's an exciting new artist at Indiana Wesleyan University. She attended here for 4 years or so before she went to college there. She's a senior this year, and she has done a one-of-a-kind piece of art, and it is available for viewing today in the West Lobby. And she's captured Lincoln with the heaviness of the world on his shoulders, riding on his horse to give that speech at Gettysburg. A true patriot. And just so you know, it is not for sale. I'm putting it on my wall at home. Thank you, Megan, for your work. We appreciate that. I'm gonna pray for you, and after I'm done praying for you and letting you go here this morning, you're going to hear a song as you are dismissed by that band that was playing a song that morning when they came to pick up our soldier and take him off to boot camp. The Oak Ridge boys will give you your dismissal today. Would you pray with me? Thank you, God, for this morning. It's been a little longer time here together, and I just thank you for the attention of the people. I thank you for the officers we got here and really love them, and thank you for the public servant role that they have. We also thank you for military guys. We thank you for those who ran in elections this past week and they were elected to positions in our community. We thank you for their public service to us, and we love them. And I ask and pray, just as heroes have risen in these fields, there's a whole congregation of heroes here this morning. There's a dad that needs to say to his son, I love you, buddy, and be heroic. There's a wife that needs to be heroic and say, you know what, we're going to try this one more time. There's somebody here who has a pretty deep grief with someone, and they need to be heroic and say, you know what, it's time to let it go. I'm putting my flag at the top of the pole. I'm walking with Christ. I'm going to represent Him. I'm not getting caught up with these petty things anymore. God, we're all over the map here this morning. But I ask and pray you be lifted up in what we do here. Lay your hand and call some politicians from our congregation. Call some public servants who will represent you, your kingdom, and this congregation well. In Jesus' name, amen. Stand with me. If you want to harass 3 strange-looking guys that have a very distinctive Southern accent, feel free. They're here, Randy, Rob, and Jeff. Again, great to have you here, guys. Have a great day. You're dismissed.